My name is Erin Donovan, and I am from Mahone Bay, Nova Scotia. I live in Clearland, actually, just outside of Mahone Bay, and I've been here for 8 years. I'm the artistic director of an organization called Here Productions. We do multimedia indoor and outdoor events that are usually involving artists across the different disciplines, so dance, theater, visual art, music. I'm an orchestrally trained musician. I play percussion, so I also work as a gigging percussionist and a pianist and a composer. And I teach here in my studio in Mahone Bay. 20 kids I have, and I mostly teach piano. Well, I wear a lot of hats, actually. I am also the education outreach coordinator for Musique Royale, which is a local classical music presenter, because I care a lot about exposing kids to as much different, diverse music and art as possible. So I have made that a mission for myself, being here in Mahone Bay. What else can I say? I'm a city girl. I lived in Toronto and Montreal and New York City, and now I am here in the Maritimes in a very small place, and I'm loving this community. So trying to figure out the challenge of making artistic things happen in a smaller place. And that is an ongoing that is an ongoing thing for me. And what else? Raising my family. Have two girls that have gone to school here locally. One is going into grade 9 and one is entering university. So that's a big transition time as well. And my husband is a sound recording engineer. He has a company called Stonehouse Sound. So we share a studio that's a separate building behind our house, which is one of the big reasons why we moved to Mahone Bay, is that we could afford to have these fantastic studios look like, because it is a very site-specific type of experience. And so it's challenging sometimes to describe what these shows look like. So a typical Here show, an outdoor show, would be the audience arriving to a location. They're often fairly remote locations, so I've had to get into buses and renting portable toilets and all of these kind of things that you don't have to do when you work in a theater. So when the audience arrives, there's usually a guide that's either an actor or a local person that people identify with, and they take you through a journey. So you usually walk about 1 kilometer in a typical show. The last outdoor show that I did was in Eastover, Nova Scotia, which is outside of Peggy's Cove. So the audience would kind of go down these winding pathways, and you turn a corner, and in the distance by the water, there's a dance performance that takes place. And then the guides kind of weave a storyline around why are you here and how are you moving through the space. So instead of sitting stationary in your seat the way that you would in a theater, and then the action takes place on a stage and evolves and unfolds in front of you, you're actually having to move through the space in order to see the evolution of the show. So in that way, and also because it's outside and they're shared common spaces that people can relate to, the audience becomes more part of the event rather than just kind of on the outside looking in. Over the years, because my background is, as I said, in classical music, I have a funny background, actually, because when I grew up as a younger person, I was in St. John's, Newfoundland, and I was studying classical piano, but then I had a very interesting turn of events because I started to get interested in percussion, and a teacher had moved from Toronto to Newfoundland, Don Wary, his name was, and he was one of these once in a lifetime people. Like you'll never meet anyone else ever like him. And my mom, I was only maybe in grade 4, and my mom, we just moved to Newfoundland, and she said, "Oh, well, I learned about this fellow." So she set up a lesson, and it was a real life changer, because his he like a typical lesson with Don would be, "Oh, let's build an instrument, and now let's get together with the other students and go to the art gallery and throw ping pong balls at gongs." And, at a certain point, they pushed a piano off the top of Signal Hill. And, those type of things are very commonplace because of this person who had designed this festival, and his whole method of living was to be inclusive. So, the people who were flying the helicopter to deliver the piano to the top of the hill are as much part of the performance as whatever the musicians or dancers were doing. So that made a huge impression on me. And I thought that's just the way that music and life was. And then I learned when I went to McGill University, and it was very in the box, like get in your practice room, practice 8 hours a day, audition, play for your symphony. There's an old school conductor and he's going to potentially yell at you and definitely glare at you. And it was just like a total shock to me. And what I didn't realize is that's actually more what my world was going to look like. And the fun was kind of sucked out of it. So as I got older, I was like, I have to create these experiences for myself and for other people. And that sense of connection and community is what drew me into music. And I wasn't happy when that was removed from music. So I put it back in because that's what makes me tick. And I want to make shows that are shows that I would like to go to and that are for everyone. So not snobby and not for a certain class of person or a certain social economic background. The thing I love about these shows is I can present really contemporary material, but because it's outside and presented in a welcoming way, you could go and never have seen anything contemporary before and you could relate to it. Or you could be 5 years old or 95 years old, so it seems to have this kind of universal welcoming feeling to it, which is really important to me. I am education outreach coordinator for Musique Royale, which is a big classical music presenter here on the South Shore. So I help them put concerts into the schools and community concerts, and they're mostly classical, but we also do, like we just recently put on a community show with Alan Syllaboy and the Thundermakers at the Bayview Community School in Mahone Bay. And I was really proud of that event. I put a lot of extra time into that event because I care a lot about diversity. And I can see how we need to connect more to First Nations communities and kind of show kids that there's more going on than, just Western classical music, which, they have quite a bit of exposure to on the South Shore because we have LAMP and we have Musique Royale. For a small place, we have a lot of amazing classical music, which is great. Okay, so for me, if you are not exposing kids to art and music, you are not totally doing well for them because kids naturally respond to creativity and art and music. It's not something that exists just for, university educated people. It really reaches people on a fundamental human level. That's one reason why it's really important to me. We don't live in a city center, so kids in cities, you can go down the road and see a quartet at the library, or you can go to the symphony, or the symphony will come to your school quite often. We're a little more remote here, so there really does have to be that exchange where you're bringing things into schools. That way, it's not just the handful of kids whose parents already know that, music and art are important, but it's all the kids. And I remember, you're going to now think I've lived everywhere. I actually have lived everywhere, but when I was in Vancouver, and that was my first exposure to classical music, they brought, Vancouver Opera brought a mini performance of Carmen into my school. And I remember it like it was yesterday. I was maybe in grade 3 actually, and they had a percussionist who was playing castanets and tambourine, and I was absolutely mesmerized. And then I signed up for band, started in grade 4 there. I signed up for percussion, and then it just always made sense to me after that. So I always feel like if I hadn't seen that school show, I just wouldn't have even known. And whether kids are going into music or not, it's that music and art really are important for kids, for their sense of self and their sense of creativity, no matter what they end up doing. But of course, I'm all for learning an instrument, taking a lesson, because one thing I've noticed out in the Maritimes, which is kind of interesting, is that we really do value the arts here. I think people know that arts are important. I never have to explain that to anyone, or principals of the schools or teachers like I have in other provinces, because I've lived all over Canada. However, I think because people do tend to live pretty close to the bone. Like a lot of people are living, you know, we're not one of the have provinces. It is a luxury to be able to take lessons. But it's maybe more difficult for people to find ways to expose their kids in that way. But I would like to see a little bit more of an emphasis on supporting the professional artists that we have in our communities, or we're going to lose them. Because it's very, very hard to make a living here as a professional artist. And I think people need to think about where they're putting their dollars, because we're all paying for art. At a certain point, we're going to see films, we're listening to music. You know, really, if you tried to have a day without art, you might realize like just how much art you are consuming and putting into your life. And so we need to be careful with our dollars. Like I think a lot of people are thinking about, you know, shopping locally and using the farmers markets, but we should be doing that with art as well. Are you paying to see high quality art? Are you, instead of just taking a paint class with anybody, like, do you know who that person is? Did that person, you know, has the specialized training? Maybe it might cost $10 more than, you know, the person who's just using Pinterest ideas or whatever. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's all kinds of ways you can approach art. But I'm just saying, if we want to have a healthy community that has professional art activity in it, it has tremendous positive spillover into our community and our kids. So just something to think about. I'll give you the walkthrough of my lovely studio. But here's my gorgeous piano that I bought in Mahone Bay. See if you can see it. And then, as you can see, I have a ton of percussion instruments because, you know, that's what I do. And this is an interesting, you've never seen one of these before, I can guarantee it. Can you see that? This is this beautiful sound sculpture that I have that was made in East Dover by a blacksmith musician called John Little. Here, I'll even play it for you. I'll try to play it with one hand while I see. It has these sort of stringed elements, and then you can play everything on here makes a beautiful sound. So believe it or not, that was a strange impulsive purchase on my part, but it's really changed the course of my artistic life, and it's been involved in many shows and performances. These are the rock pillows that I used in my last show, my Burnwater show. That's about half of them. The rest are in storage. But they work like seating for the audience, but they also look really beautiful as part of the set. And then there's just like, you know, tons of drums and tons of plants. So I teach in here, and I practice in here, and I work in here. I try not to I actually don't bring my computer in here much because I try to keep it pretty open, creative space. It's my playground, basically. And when my kids come in for lessons, it has that feeling to it, right? So this is a place where we can be creative and take chances and make lots of mistakes and have fun. I'm just embarking on a new project with Alice Burdick, who's a local poet and co-owner of Lexicon Bookstore, which is a fabulous bookstore in Lunenburg. And she and I are developing a project around some writings that she does called trail reports. So she writes these trail reports, which are these kind of snapshots of what she sees on her walks, whether she's by herself or with somebody else. And so we're developing trail reports that we can do together outside that are variable sort of snapshots that have percussion accompaniment with them. So I've actually worked quite a lot with poets lately because I'm interested in poetry as sound and how sound can affect the emotional layers inside of poetry. So I've worked with Basma Kavanaugh recently, and also Sylvia Hamilton, just doing sort of improvs with percussion and poetry. And I find it really, really interesting because I feel like I can access sound through the emotional layers of what the poems are telling me. So it's sort of I'm not thinking in the English language when they're talking. I'm thinking about what's behind the words that they're saying and just trying to use that almost as a score for my sound, if that makes sense. And the way women think is kind of what's needed in the world right now. And I think even a lot of men are realizing that. Like there are differences in how men and women do and see things. Yeah. And I think it's time for that type of a change. It, you know, in my area that I picked for my job, it's something like 2% women and 98% men. But as I get older, I'm seeing the problem is that it's not changing. That's not changing. And then I feel like, well, am I just sort of pretending to be a guy when I'm working? Because I actually have a different viewpoint that I've always just kind of put on the back burner. Anymore. I'm turning 50 this year, and I'm not doing stuff that I don't want to do.